Welcome back to Full Court Femmes.
Annie and Erin, we are officially in the part of the season where every possession feels like math.
And not just standings math, seeding math.
St. John's comes into this one after a gritty, uncomfortable, very March-type win over Georgetown. Final score, we're all shocked. St. John's 72, Georgetown 69, and that one was not easy to watch.
Erin, I'm just happy that I have my cardiologist appointment scheduled for April because my heart can't take many more of these games. That game was tight the whole way, back and forth in the final minutes. Lead changes, possessions that felt enormous.
That was quite the game, and it looked very different from the Villanova game that was free-flowing. This was survival when they only shot 39% from the field.
The one leading the survival charge, none other than your man, Caroline Zuby Ejiofor, 23 points on senior night. He was the stabilizer again, interior scoring, rebounding. He gave St. John's the physical presence when Georgetown tried to turn this game into a grind.
Erin, he did what he's always done all season long, and it was senior night, which made it extra special. But then we have to talk about Josan Stannen. Huge lift off the bench here with 15 points, all of them in the second half. Shot making when the offense stalled and Georgetown packed the paint.
Caroline, those two basically carried the late game composure because Georgetown made St. John's earn every single possession.
Well, what about those last 2 minutes? It was wild. Georgetown kept answering every single Johnny's push. St. John's had to execute multiple late-minute possessions.
That's the kind of game that tests poise. And for a team chasing first place, you have to win some ugly games.
All right, ladies, I'll own mine. I had St. John's 80, G-Town 70.
Instead, it was 72-69.
That margin was way too close for any of us. And the pace, way tighter than we expected.
That's late season basketball for you. Nobody is giving you clean looks anymore.
All right, let's grade it then. You know what time it is. Bold prediction number 1 for the St. John's Georgetown game. Hold Malik back under 16.
Erin, that was a bold. Mac finished with 14 points.
All right, he had moments. We watched it. We were a little nervous, but St. John's never let him control tempo.
Prediction number 2, win the rebounding by 10 or more.
Busted. St. John's won the glass, but not by double digits.
That was a closer margin than anyone predicted.
Let's go to bold prediction number 3. Force 14 turnovers.
Busted. Georgetown protected the ball better than they expected.
I think we might have a run on this, unfortunately, the opposite way than before. Bold prediction number 4, 20 or plus points off those turnovers. It's killing me. That's a busted. Without those turnovers, that scoring never arrived. And on to prediction number 3, double-digit halftime lead.
Erin, that's actually prediction number 5. But we were busted. The game was tight all night.
So, as it turns out, we went 1 bold, 4 busted.
But we still won. So let's just take it for what it is.
So now we turn the page because this one matters even more.
Oh my God. Friday night, the Prudential Center, 9 p.m. Who schedules these games? St. John's versus Seton Hall.
And this is where it's going to get really complicated. If St. John's wins, they stay alive for first place in the East.
They definitely needed help to keep this option alive. Creighton needed to win on Wednesday against Butler, and they did.
Yeah, but in addition, Providence needed to drop one of their last 2, and this also happened on Wednesday night when they lost Marquette. So right now, it is looking like St. John's could claim the number 1 seed in the Big East tournament with the win against Seton Hall.
Erin, and if not, they're still co-conference champions with UConn, but second seed.
So what are they up against then on Friday night? Let's dig in a little bit more. Seton Hall comes into this game 10-9 in Big East play, and the last week has been a mixed picture for them.
Start with the loss to UConn on February 28th, Erin. That game never really tilted their way. UConn controlled the pace, they controlled the glass, and they forced Seton Hall to score in the half court.
Well, Seton Hall struggled to get a clean offense against UConn. They were chasing possessions instead of dictating them.
Then you fast forward to March 3rd against Xavier, and it looked different. More tempo, more aggression, and they found enough offense to win.
That game showed the version of Seton Hall who showed up in the top 25 earlier in the season that they can be dangerous when their guards are attacking and the ball isn't sticking.
If you're looking at who drives Seton Hall right now, it starts with Adam Clark. He's the one initiating offense, pushing pace, attacking the paint, trying to force the defense to react. Against Xavier on March 3rd, that aggression really showed up. Clark went downhill early, creating offense and forcing rotations of the Pirates, and he delivered 16 points in the 77-68 win.
All right, but let's contrast that when you look at the UConn game on February 28th. UConn made life much harder for him. He had just 4 points in that game because UConn pressured the ball. They cut off the driving lanes and forced him into tougher mid-range attempts instead of clean paint touches.
And that's where the St. John's comparison becomes interesting, Erin. Back on January 20th, St. John's defended Clark almost exactly the way UConn did. Disciplined pressure, no overhelp, forcing him into contested shots instead of letting him dictate pace.
And they held him to just 3 points that night. So when Clark is comfortable attacking the lanes, Seton Hall's offense expands. But when teams like UConn and St. John's contain that first step, the Pirates' offense starts to shrink.
The other piece of the puzzle for Seton Hall is A.J. Stanton-McCray. He's the interior energy guy, rebounding, finishing around the rim, extending possessions. Against Xavier, he had 12 points, active around the basket and on the glass, which helped Seton Hall generate second chances and keep the offense alive.
But again, let's look at the UConn game. The Huskies controlled the boards and limited those second chances for others. He did contribute 20 points against UConn in that 71-67 loss.
And the January 20th St. John's game looked very similar. Stanton McCray never really took control of the glass, and without those extra possessions, Seton Hall had to rely more heavily on perimeter shots. He was the lead scorer that night as well, contributing 16 points.
All right, so I think we just laid out the pattern. When Stanton McCray is extending possessions and shooting efficiently, the Pirates stay competitive. When teams finish defensive rebounds the first time, Seton Hall offense loses a lot of its rhythm.
So, Erin, when you step back and look at the 3 games, Xavier, UConn, and that first St. John's matchup, the blueprint is actually pretty clear. Clark controls tempo, McCray controls second chances.
And when teams like UConn and St. John's take those 2 things away,
Seton Hall suddenly has to grind for every basket, which is exactly the kind of game St. John's wants on Friday night.
Which means the real question Friday night isn't just who scores, it's who dictates the style of the game.
Exactly, Annie. And that takes us right into the keys to the game. Key number 1, control the tempo early.
Seton Hall wants the game to feel scrappy and chaotic. That's when they're at their best.
But when St. John's settles into half-court offense, Erin, moving the ball, working through the paint, the game becomes much more predictable.
So key number 2 then is get back in transition.
The Pirates generate a lot of their offense when the game breaks open. Live ball turnovers, long rebounds, quick pushes.
If St. John's gets their defense set, Seton Hall offense becomes much more half-court dependent. That's where the Red Storm defense has shown to be excellent.
All right, key number 3, move the ball like they did against Villanova.
Please move the ball exactly that way. If you go back to the Villanova game, they won because the ball moved. Players cut. Shots came inside out.
When St. John's offense stagnates, they start forcing shots. When the ball moves, the entire floor opens up.
Key number 4, what they did not do against Georgetown, but what they did do against Villanova, and that was win the middle of the game.
Not the first 5 minutes, Erin. Not the final 2. That middle stretch, the 8 to 10 minute run where games usually tilt.
All right, I'd be okay with a final 2 as well. Let me just suggest that because we needed that against Georgetown. But when we see them own the middle, that's where the depth tends to show up. Fresh legs, off the bench scoring, second unit prepared and ready to go with their defensive pressure.
Key number 5, play like a first place team.
And they are. That's who they are coming in to Friday night.
First place in the Big East is still very much on the table. And the teams chasing titles don't wait for drama. They impose themselves.
So that means St. John's must dictate the style. And if they do, the game tilts in their way.
And the best part, you can see it in the numbers.
Which means it's time to test it.
Last game of the conference, right before the tournament. Let's give her a go. Bold or busted!
Seton Hall edition.
Bold prediction number 1. St. John's commits 10 or fewer turnovers.
I like that. If this turns into a sloppy game, Erin, the building gets loud and momentum swings fast.
Ball security isn't just a stat on Friday night. It's got to be about control.
Agreed. Number 2, St. John's wins points in the paint by 12 or more.
The first matchup against Seton Hall tilted on the inside. When St. John's establishes the paint with Zuby, with Prey, with Hopkins, with Mitchell, everything else opens up.
And when the paint disappears, suddenly the game tightens.
We don't want to see that.
No.
So, bold prediction number 3, St. John's forces 12 or more turnovers.
This is where St. John's can create separation. Live ball turnovers turn into easy points, and easy points quiet road crowds.
I think this is where we need to see Captain Jack back in the game with his quick hands from Villanova. All right, bold prediction number 4. Your man Zuby records 15 or more points and 10 or more rebounds.
Erin, if this becomes another grind game like Georgetown, you want the anchor steady in the middle, and that's our guy Zuby. All right, bold prediction number 5. St. John's shoots 45% or better.
I hope so, because they didn't do that against Georgetown.
Because if the shots aren't falling, this game probably looks a lot like the Georgetown game.
My heart can't take it, and neither can yours or Annie's. All right, Annie. Last regular season game, first place pressure.
No easing into this one. So what does the game actually look like, Annie?
All right, ladies, I think Seton Hall makes this uncomfortable. They're going to play physical. They're going to slow the pace, and they're going to try to drag St. John's into another one-possession game lead.
Which feels very Georgetown.
Exactly, Caroline. But the difference is St. John's has shown they can survive that kind of game. They've been in these late situations now 2 or 3 times. They're calmer with the ball. They rebound better late, and they trust their half-court offense. So I think it stays tight longer than people expect. But St. John's pulls away in the final few minutes. So here we go. I've got St. John's 79, Seton Hall 67.
Okay, that goes back to having to win in the last 2 minutes, but I'm not sure that's going to be easy.
Not easy, but enough separation to finish the job. St. John's 79, Seton Hall 67. If it lands anywhere close to that, this is a massive road win.
Because it does more than just close the regular season. It keeps St. John's firmly in the conversation for the top of the Big East.
That's where things get really interesting, because the moment this game ends, everyone's attention just shifts to Selection Sunday.
Selection Sunday, the national conversation on March 15th. That's when the tournament becomes the real picture for our Johnnies. Where St. John's lands in the bracket, who they face, what region they travel to, all of that gets decided on Selection Sunday.
But, ladies, before we get to that, there's one more stage. The Big East tournament starts March 11th. And if there's one thing we know about the Big East, seeding doesn't guarantee anything.
No, it doesn't, Caroline. Every team walks into that tournament believing they can win 3 games. That's the beauty and the chaos of March Madness.
A win keeps momentum rolling. A win keeps the championship conversation alive.
And a win means St. John's walks into postseason play with confidence, exactly where you want to be.
So we'll be watching every possession.
And we'll break it all down right here.
You know what we're going to say? Subscribe to Full Court Femmes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube.
No hype, all hoops.
Let's
go,
go,
Johnnies!
Johnnies!